Welcome, one and all. You're very welcome indeed to which show is this we're doing now? Oh yeah, it's Literary as Feck, of course.
That's the one. Yep.
And this time it was my choice, and as usual when it's my choice, I chose something I wasn't familiar with, something I wanted to read. So it could go either way. You know, it can go badly sometimes. But this time we kind of struck gold, I think.
I think so. I think, for a very specific kind of reader, I think this would really fit the bill, and we'll get into what kind of person that would be later on.
So
yes,
the book in question specifically is this is from how do you pronounce Dancing Twatara Press? Would you call it?
Yes, yeah, maybe.
Which is part of Ramble House, I think. Yeah, and here we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we got the same book.
Yep.
Again, looking more colourful. So I think it's your lighting.
I think it's just the lighting, yeah.
Yes. Hostesses in Hell and Other Stories, the selected stories of Russell Gray, Volume 1, edited and introduced by John Pellon, who I learned just died.
Oh,
April.
That's no good.
No.
Okay.
I have to admit, I didn't know much about John Pellon, even though he's a writer in his own regard, from what I understand. But looking at, like, just in terms of, other collections he's curated and things he's written introductions for, and sounds like a fella worth, listening.
Okay.
I think he knows his stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will be ordering the second volume. I will tell you that right now, because it's these things are like some sort of candy that's very hard to stop eating. In fact, I had to be strict with myself to not just kind of, because I think you could overkill with this, because they are a spicy treat,
Yes, well, I think you may have enjoyed this even. I think you have a slightly higher tolerance for a certain type of differently abled writing than I do. And don't get me wrong, I got a lot of fun out of this collection in general, but I did find it a bit of a slog here and there. So I'll wait and see how you get on with the second volume.
Yes, for sure. I'll let you know.
So Russell Gray, as is explained to us in John Pellon's brief, but quite informative little intro, was AKA for a guy called Bruno Fisher. He also has another AKA for one of the stories, Harrison Storm.
Yeah, that's a great name.
It is a good pseudonym. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stories in the collection. All originally in what he calls weird menace periodicals in the intro, but also known as the shudder pulps, right?
Yes, this is kind of new to me. I was more aware of the kind of, the places where the Robert E. Howards of the world and the Clark Ashton Smiths had published their stuff, the weird tales and things like that. But these sinister stories and Dime Mystery Magazine, Spicy Horror Stories, which is a great name for a magazine.
Yeah, sinister stories.
These are all magazines I'd never heard of.
I was vaguely aware. There's a whole book about them by this guy called Robert Kenneth Jones called The Shudder Pulps, which has been on my radar for a while. And I might have to just cave in and buy it at some point. But from what I understand from this collection, and also not always though in this collection, but largely and from the few other bits and pieces I've read, is they seem to be tinged with elements of the horror and weird and erotica, but always kind of revealed to have a logical.
Yes, we'll get into the Scooby-Doo ending a bit later on, because it features heavily in many of these stories.
Which is something, to be honest, when I hear that, I always think, it's like the thing, like they can't make proper ghost movies in mainland China because ghosts don't exist because they're not communists or whatever. I think that's basically it. So
wait, Mao is he's not a communist ghost?
I guess not. No, I guess you go over the other side of the aisle once you die.
Okay, all right.
So, and whenever I hear that, I always think, I don't like the sound of that. But actually, the way they play out in these is actually kind of quite amazing because it's so obviously lip service.
Oh, yes.
So obviously just, and then it was actually a Nazi pretending to smuggle. It wasn't a. That's the thing. It's never a ghost in the lighthouse, right? It's always Hans Gruber pretending to be a demon or something while they smuggle guns in or something like that, right?
But in these stories, it's particularly hand waved away.
It's
in
amazing.
a hilarious way.
Real handbrake turn endings.
We'll get to them as story by story. But at a certain point, I just wrote down in my notes like, "Whoa, this is the third Scooby-Doo ending, and it wasn't. It wasn't last."
Right. So before we jump into the stories, Bruno Fisher, 1908 to 1992. Born in Berlin, moved to America as a child. I think East Coast. I think was a police reporter at some point. Interesting, and also a bit of a political guy in the New York State scene.
That's what interested me. The socialist kind of, running for a public office on a socialist platform, and then I did. Before I read that, I started to note in some of the stories, it was like there's this little thread that comes up in some of the stories of like, rich people are bad. Right. I was like, it kind of jumped out at me. And then there's a point in one of the later stories where he goes full on like Jack London goes into the hobo jungle, kind of a part of one of the stories. Like, oh yeah, this seems like written by a guy who was also reading, Steinbeck and, what would have been, Yes.
But
he has his own.
Please don't go into this expecting Steinbeck. You will be sorely disappointed.
Yes, indeed. And then we'll talk about his relationship with boobs, I think, at a certain point, because I think that needs to be avoidable. I can't figure out if this man loved them intensely or hated them or fell in some weird, it's a love-hate relationship, because if he's not describing them sweating and jiggling and juddering, in a hypnotic way, then he is describing the absolute torture and degradation and destruction of the female breast. Yeah.
And we should mention at this point, these things were written in the mid-30s. Like the shudder pulps were from 33 to 41, I think, something like that. A very specific, like according to, there's a quote from Bruno Fisher on his Wikipedia page, I think, where they just stopped writing. They just stopped accepting them, like boom, overnight, like that. For some reason, there was a taste for these, and then all of a sudden there wasn't anymore. And I can kind of see why they might have got a bit samey.
Yes,
but that's quite a
run. But also, what's interesting too is they seem to have kind of erupted out of more straightforward detective stories. And at some point, someone was like, "Hang on. People seem to really like when we do this," or and they were like, just push it to as far as you can go. And I think Russell Gray pushes it pretty much as far as you can go with it.
Pretty much for the time. I mean, these really are quite shocking. They're kind of quite shocking anyway. Weird, weird, badly like a child drawing a gore scene, like in crayon, but with a blunt energy, which is still quite shocking. But in the 30s, they must have been mind-blowing.
I don't think anyone comes back to this until maybe some of Clive Barker's Books of Blood stuff. I mean, that's a long gap. That's a 50-year gap, it feels to me, in terms of anything as outrageously body horror gory obviously Stephen King would have been doing some stuff, but like, who else is as far out there? And even Clive Barker in many ways seems tame compared to some of what's going on in these stories.
Well, I think the thing with Clive Barker is everything's tempered by the fact that it's very well written as well.
Right? Yes.
Whereas this stuff is just so bam, bam, bam. It's like, it's like some of the more shocking gore films are rubbish, but then because they're rubbish, the gore scenes seem so much more impactful, right? Because they just
if these books seem less written, as they would have been like carved into a desk with like at school somewhere,
I was thinking the cinematic equivalent would be that Dwayne Esper film Maniac, right? Like just a total outlier. Like, what the hell is this now? Like,
yes.
Wow.
I mean, funny enough, the only place you probably would have seen some of this would have been that, and maybe, like when did Buñuel do, Razor Blade Across the Eye,
32 something.
Yeah, like there was,
Oh no, even early. Hang on, Winshan Andalou is 28, maybe 1928.
Right.
Yeah.
But like that's that's the territory we're in.
But again, that's
high art.
As the veneer of art, right? Yeah. But I'm guessing you could have picked up your copy of Spicy Stories at the newsstand, I suppose, if you want.
Oh yeah, the dime store. Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall we start with? I think Hostesses and Hell is a great place to start because it's obviously the title story. It's the first story in the book, and it very much is. In some ways, maybe they shouldn't have had it as the first story because really it is. It boils everything he does down to its essence. I mean, and pushes it in some ways, to my mind, to the furthest degree. Okay. In terms of,
I'll be referring to my copy here. So occasionally, if I, falter, forgive me, because I kind of remember. I just have to remember what each story was.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm happy to do a quick rundown of that one because it
this is the island one, right?
This is the island one, yeah. So we begin with a guy called Jay and his girlfriend, and it seems like 20 other women for some reason, all on a boat. Yeah. Because this is the first one where he's like, "This is going to be wholesale. I'm going to introduce 20 almost completely unfleshed out cardboard character women, like with one line of description, like this is the cute one, these are the two that are this, and this is the chubby one."
What struck me was they're all cute actually in the end. One has some shimmering loveliness. He uses loveliness a lot. And all the other ones are like also kind of hot. He fancies them.
They're all cute. Yeah, there he is. Whether they're middle-aged or 20, they're all attractive. So basically, they get shipwrecked on this island where immediately this kind of doctor guy comes down who is introduces seeming sketchy right from the get-go, and he kind of says like, "Oh yeah, well, you're not going to be able to leave." So it turns out that the island is home to an asylum for the mentally deranged or damaged children of the ultra wealthy.
Right.
But they're described at one point as one of them is a shuffling crab monster. One of them has tentacles. Like they're so out there, the descriptions of what these guys look like, that it's one's a pinhead. Like, I mean, again, if you were making a movie of this, Michael Berryman would certainly be in it. You'd have your pick of weirdo. What's his face? Clint Howard would be in there. You'd have all of those, but they're described as being almost like full-on monsters. But yet the story establishes no, they're just they're very chromosomally damaged children of the ultra wealthy. Maybe it's inbreeding. It's not spelled out, but it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
And there's also this incredibly attractive woman who's kind of the most frightening inmate of this asylum. She's already escaped. Yeah.
Once again, they're all incredibly attractive women. And all the men are very kind of like, for instance, you mentioned this is a trip, so you should probably mention that it's very much like it's kind of what ho, let's go for a spin on the yacht kind of. Everyone's very square jawed and dinner jacket wearing and slightly. So that's the interesting thing as well, is even though it does have this kind of eat the rich kind of thing going on, at the same time everyone seems fairly well to do, and they go motoring on the weekends or boating. They're not exactly tough working class characters, right? But they're kind of two-fisted heroes, but sophisticated, and that kind of very. I was imagining, like an Errol Flynn or something like that.
Yes,
in the movie version.
I wrote down, one of the things I said, positives, wastes no time. Like the story, we have like a page before they get to the island, and then like bam, it's just all action all the time. And then so I wrote this down. I mean WTF, there's no supernatural element in the story, but we have a cyclops a slug monster, a crab man, some dude with tentacles, and a gorilla-sized hydrocephalic. Like, what is going on with these wealthy families that they have people?
Yeah.
So
I'm actually quite impressed that you've managed to sum it up as well, because like each one of these stories I was invested in, and as soon as it ended, I was, what happened? Like, I couldn't quite, because it is all action, there's nothing to kind of place it in your brain. It's just a number of things happen. And then it finishes.
It's over. Yes. Yeah. And usually there's some reveal. In this case, the reveal is that the doctor doesn't want to lose his livelihood, and so he basically plans to kind of feed all of these in one way or another, you know, like to feed the sexual appetites of his maniac clientele or whatever. He's going to just let the girls be tortured and brutalized by this, you know.
Yes. So we should mention the torture, because it wouldn't be a Russell Gray story without So here we go. I shall read an extract, if you like. This is when so we, you know, at a certain, all these stories at a certain point boil down to a set piece where some girls get tortured by whatever the monstrous thing is. This is the next one. The Catwoman is a bit of an outlier.
That's an outlier. Yeah.
But other than that, is this the only one with like actual? Oh no, I suppose later on there's monsters. I mean, they're not always monsters. Some of them are just sadists, right? But this one, particularly, they are monsters or freaks or something like that, which isn't always part of the Russell Gray mixture, right? It's sometimes and sometimes it isn't. So here we go. Miss Desma, her clothes ripped from her, one of her legs broken, was trying frantically to crawl away from two monsters who pranced and giggled on either side of her and kept jabbing pointed branches into her delicate flesh. A thing like a giant slug, which used all four limbs like hands, was tearing Mary Foster apart as I have seen boys do to a fly. She was dead, I saw, and her blood spattered the thing's body. It's just, it's nicely done, very graphic. The gorehounds amongst you will not be disappointed. By the ghost, even if you've been raised on, you know, things in more recent years. I think you'll get a kick. I would imagine it's a bit like if you were raised in the 80s watching horror films and then you went back and saw like Blood Feast, in very bright primary colors. You're like, oh man, this is what they were doing before I was born. This is pretty hardcore.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's funny you bring that up, because several things kind of occurred to me as I was, like potential directors. Because I mean, the thing about his stories is because they're perfect film treatments, right? In a way, because they're short stories, so they would easily be expanded to an 80-minute, movie. Obviously, if it was Italian, Lucio Fulci, Umberto Lenzi spring to mind, or even I was thinking Enzo Girolami, because of the Dr. Butcher MD, which in some ways to me, that was the one that most, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see this as a Dr. Butcher MD kind of a thing. But then, if you made it in the 60s, Herschel Gordon Lewis springs to mind potentially.
Hiroishi could have had a go at something.
I wrote his name is right down here in my list as an Ero Guro kind of a thing. Or even as a Category 3 Hong Kong movie. You could see it. You could see it in almost any setting. It's boiled down to its essentials: 20-odd women, being attacked by
I tell you what you need. What we really need is we need a Netflix, the Tales of Russell Gray series is what we need.
Absolutely.
Different, like those Masters of Horror things, but more full on, more ramped up, more politically incorrect, and just go for it. Like, I don't think you can do it. You can't do the nice, tidied up version of this. You have to go on. You have it's got to be full of hot-looking bimbos with no characterization, being ripped to shreds. Don't care that you're going to be attacked. Just go for it. Just make it full on. Because someone smart can do it with a touch of irony, so people can get the joke, right?
Yeah.
Less people up in arms too much, but that's what we need. A
Yes.
Tales
Okay.
of
All right. Let's see if you can sell that to Netflix or Amazon Prime. So I did write down the negatives, and this kind of goes for really the rest of the stories, right? I think this would hold up. Although one or two of the later ones, maybe not so much. Right. But I said, the only thing is a lack of atmosphere and rising dread. I found like it's right away. We're like, bang, and then we don't have time to kind of feel any sense of worry or
Right, but you see, I kind of like that as well, because I think at a certain point, as a jaded kind of either viewer or reader or something, even when something's done well, if you've seen that done well a million times, it gets a little bit boring.
Sure.
Like for instance, there's another. I haven't seen it. Slightly unfair, but isn't there a new mini-series version of The Stand, right?
Yes.
And I can't. It might be really good, but just the thought of going through that whole again, I just feel like I can't be bothered with it, because I kind of know I don't really need to be. Do you know what I mean? So there's something about this which just comes straight out the gate and just goes, it's quite refreshing.
But it's funny, like, I mean, I can't help but think about, contemporaries, people like Lovecraft, who did that so well, building that cloying sense of dread, and it would be great to kind of match the two of them together in a way, to have the ultra gore with that facility to build a sense of panic.
I suppose the difference there is, though, like what you're saying about building a sense of dread and then it pays off. I think the difference with Lovecraft, though, is Lovecraft is unique in so much as the payoff is almost the least interesting part of the book. The money shot is a slow motion money shot through the whole thing, right? Like as soon as he starts describing something, you're in. So it's not as if you're waiting around for something. The pornography of Lovecraft is from the first word, right? You're so in there.
Okay.
Or whatever that word is.
But I mean, I think there's an amazing story. I think about the Wendigo. It might be by Ambrose Bierce as well, which kind of.
I think Wendigo is.
Or is that?
What's his face? Not Ambrose Bierce. Wendigo is. What's his name? This is good podcasting.
Okay, we can come back to that later on.
I'll carry on and I'll look it up.
I mean, I just think, I mean, it's a minor quibble. It's, as I said, and some of the later stories actually do a slightly better job of waiting a little, delaying gratification just slightly longer to give you a sense of like, ooh, things are going to go sideways, whereas this story just, things go sideways about paragraph 2.
Algernon Blackwood.
Okay, it's Blackwood.
Which I understand because, Ambrose Bierce spelt sideways is Algernon Blackwood.
Exactly. So shall we get into the Catwoman, which is the second, as you said, is kind of the outlier.
Yeah, story. Maybe in some ways the kind of least satisfying. I mean, I kind of enjoyed it in a way, but it's so in this one it's basically a woman, again, a hot woman with tits. I didn't make that note, but probably it's Russell Gray, right? So with quivering loveliness, is accosted at her door one night in her apartment building by an old woman who appears to want bread. Yes. And tries to muscle her way into her apartment.
That's the most effectively chilling part, is when it describes that she almost turns gelatinous and kind of seems to start be squeezing through the door.
Yeah, like the
that was like, ooh, that's disturbing.
And then she fucks her off basically, and then discovers that other various characters in her apartment building who had also encountered this bread lusting woman have been ripped,
raked with claws, and their boobs, and as usual, again, boob trauma,
breast mutilation.
It's it's a major. But
and it turns out that it was I can't remember now. Was it a building had burnt down and an old woman who ran a bakery or was hungry or something?
I think it was invented an entirely new story. I think it was that she had basically just gotten so weak that she had been begging for food, and maybe something had happened where she couldn't get out of the apartment.
Right.
And she had
I'm sure there was a fire
death.
or something.
Maybe there was a fire.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And there was a cat sitting on her face, which was weird when they found her in the room, starved to death.
Yeah. So so it turns out she can also mutate into a cat.
Or the cat itself has somehow absorbed her vengeful soul and is carrying out the murders. But you know what the story reminded me of?
In and out, right? Because she transforms into a black cat and run away. And the big reveal, spoilers at the end, is she guns down the old woman. She's shot the cat to death.
Yes. But what the story reminded me of in a strange way was, have you ever read, I think it's called The Forbidden. It's the story The Candyman. The movie Candyman.
Yes, I have read it. It's somewhere in the Books of Blood, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
In that it's all about this idea of like an urban legend coming to life, like being willed into existence by the people in the kind of a depressed apartment building kind of a thing, right? That's the original story. You're
quite right. I hadn't made that connection, but it's very much like especially the way it's depicted in the film version as well, right? Because it's relocated to the projects, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
this is kind of a projecty kind of a building, we're told. And then there's this idea that like everyone kind of knows the story about the old lady who starved to death, and everyone kind of believes it's her that's doing this.
It is definitely one of his. It's like there's two different camps. There's, like you said, there's the frolicking like people upstate stories, and then there's these much more urban stories, and this is definitely one of his urban ones, right? So I mean, this one plays out a bit less perverted and weird because you got tits mutilated. It's not full, there's no full on women being tortured for people's sexual pleasure.
Yes, no, it's the most like a short horror story. Right. I said this, although weirdly enough, it had enough echoes of other things that I liked that it worked for me.
I mean, like I said, I think these things maybe work, and this is the shortest story in the book as well, right? It's like only 10 pages long. I think these things work as well if you're a bit of a connoisseur of weird fiction and stuff like that. Like, it's interesting to see things in protean form and where these things come from, maybe more so than them being a really great read, right? Like,
sure,
they're more like lab specimens or something.
Right.
So yes, on we go, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Death Senses Mannequins, spelled Mannikins.
Yes. So this is the first story where he writes himself, I think, because you said he was a police reporter.
Bruno Fisher. Police reporter,
and this is a police reporter main character, and so
again a very two-fisted kind of character.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes.
It seems with the police chief.
So this is the one where he's on the case of some woman called Norma Hare who's disappeared, but I think at the very beginning of the story somebody sneaks these little figurines into his car, right? There's the little skeletons in a hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil kind of a pose. And then he's sort of aware that beautiful women all over the city have been disappearing. And he's particularly following this Norma Hare story. And then I don't remember, he's just driving around. He just finds her staggering at the side of the road, like utterly messed up. Like, she's like, I can't even remember. It was something awful. Was she the one whose eyes were out?
Nice tits.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. She's still
Always.
Even though I think she might be the one whose eyes are gouged out. Right.
Doesn't matter, the tits are there. He has an almost Russ Meyer like fixation on.
Oh, boobs. Yeah. And then and so then this is the one where he leaves her in the car. He finds her, and then he leaves her in the car, and maybe she's dead, maybe she dies in the car. This is all kind of unclear in my memory. He runs into the the bar to phone the like before the police. He decides to phone the newspaper office and tells them the story about how he's found this woman dead, and then comes back out and she's gone. She's been abducted from the car.
And this all culminates in basically a nightclub.
The Mephistopheles Club.
Yes, where the women are tortured as a floor show, right?
Yes.
For depraved clientele.
Yeah.
And it seems to be hidden in the sub-basement of a sub-basement or something. Yeah. It's a little bit confusing in terms of... Actually, there's a few things in his story that we'll get to one specific example later where I get the feeling like a plausible world geography or geometry like doesn't matter. Like,
yes.
That. Because he goes to this club and it's basically, I don't think they take an elevator down. I think they just go down. They go down some steps.
It seems surprisingly easy to get into this place.
Yeah, they go down like some steps. I get like one flight of steps, and then suddenly when they go looking for it, it's like in the bowels of the earth or something. It's like how do they move the whole club?
And the fact that there are these huge paintings, because another feature of these murders is that there is this kind of tattooing going on, where these figurines again of these little skeletons with the see no evil are tattooed onto the stomachs of the girls who have been murdered. And they go down into this club, and there's these massive wall murals of these same murders.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the whole side story about how the murders themselves seem to be the work of a dead serial killer, which this police reporter had covered, a year previous, but he's been executed. But then it's the same, it's all the same MO, right?
Yeah, I'm guessing I have a feeling that Bruno Fisher was not big on rewrites. Like I get the feeling he would be going along and then, that would be cool if I brought that idea, and then I've run out of
words.
I've that's my quote. Quick check back. Any tits in there? Yeah, good. Let's move on. Let's not going back and checking if it all adds up necessarily. Which is fine because it's such a breathless read. You don't really care either, right?
And that's the one where basically it turns out the whole thing is a white slavery cover, and that's the Scooby-Doo ending is that his boss, which he's only really been in one, which I love as the stories go on, it gets increasingly tenuous. I'm like, do I even remember this character? Like they introduced it in the 2 lines earlier in the story, and you're like,
I totally gave up trying to figure out who anyone was.
Right.
It's basically a succession of square-jawed heroes and women with tits, and the former has to save the latter from being mutilated.
Yes.
And sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. And then at the end, it was all, if it wasn't for
old Uncle Joe.
Yeah. So now here we go. So I actually have, I think, let me just double check. I have 2 favorites in this collection. Like 2 stories which are like, okay, these are, extract these and put them in another collection with maybe some of the best of spicy pulp stuff. And this is the gold standard, I think. And this is the first of the 2.
I just, before we finish with the last story, I did make a note at the end. I did think that the club was very strange in that it seemed a really stupid decision on the part of the white slavers to have this club with giant murals on it depicting their crimes. And I thought there was another anti-rich kind of, the anti-rich pervos theme, which was this idea that these girls are being sold to ultra-rich degenerates.
Right.
That's, an element. And I also thought that if Herschel Gordon Lewis and Russ Meyer could have teamed up.
Yes, and the thing is, this whole thing about these ultra, but he comes back to it so much again and again and again. You start wondering how much Bruno Fisher would have quite liked to have been an ultra-rich pervert.
Generous.
And I mean, there's some. I mean, again, it could just be, but I don't think it was necessarily market forces like pushing his hand, because it's not as if everyone else was writing stuff like this, right? So there's a definite there's some.
Oh, it's all him. There's certain things that we keep coming back to again and again and again.
Like a
that seems like somebody working something out.
Yeah,
like on the page.
So
but anyway, so fresh fiancés for the Devil's Daughter.
Now this one, this is the one for me. I thought this was
Oh yes,
thought
yes.
this was
I
brilliant.
just looked at my notes to remember which one this is. This is the only story, actually, I think, with an extended male torture scene in it. Like,
Right.
a really kind of, and it goes on for quite a while, which is this is nice because it kind of cuts the pace of all of the poor ladies getting abused. There's but anyway, go on.
This one is just so unrelentingly grim, like all the way through, and doesn't even have a Scooby, because there's nothing supernatural about this. I think this is what I like about this one. It's just some sadists. It's just some horrible people. Specifically, so here we go. There's a woman. Her name is Talamag.
Right? Talamag, yeah.
And basically, Talamag is a frustrated writer. Who's
if she even cares. I mean, like
who's written some where they go the Lovecraft route. It's the unutterable, right? It's like I couldn't even begin to explain how horrible this. And she's tried to get her books published, and she keeps like using her feminine wiles to cozy up to all these different publishers. And she keeps getting turned down because basically
our main character is a literary agent, our protagonist of this one, but the usual square-jawed.
Here's a bit of his confusing geography as well. So they meet originally at a party, right? So Talamag dropped the glass from her lips, and suddenly I realized that she was so close to me that her pointed breasts always touched my chest. Over her left shoulder, I saw Portia, Teal, and Helen, that's the protagonist's girlfriend, staring at us. Helen smiled. She knew that a literary agent of my reputation, who, by accepting to handle a writer's manuscript, practically assured its sale, was always being annoyed by women authors who tried to use their bodies as substitutes for the lack of literary talent. But the reason I mention it is, apart from the casual
sexism,
is so he's staring over Talamag's shoulder behind her to Helen.
To us,
Talamag glanced over my shoulder and coldly studied Helen. So Helen's standing behind both of them. That's amazing. It's Helen. I want to know more about this omnipresent girlfriend that he has. So that was just a little catch I had, just as an example of I'm wondering how screen stories were before they were released into the wild.
So he for some reason agrees to meet, even though she's kind of made a pass at him, he agrees to meet her in her apartment to discuss her work.
Right.
He shows up and as you said, has that response of being like, oh my goodness. I couldn't, I'm a very open-minded fellow, but no. So he refuses her, and then she has her massive, she has these bodyguards that are just like a head and like,
I was imagining, what was Ratfink's henchman called?
Oh yes, exactly.
Not Ratfink, Batfink.
Yes.
The karate chopping guy, right?
Yes.
He was probably called Kato or something like that, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember how, but he incapacitated, crushes him in a barrel, and then she chains him up. And whips the living hell out of him. Which I do. Maybe does she even strip naked to do this? Probably.
I think she's half naked all the time. She's wearing some kind of spider web dress that reveals her quivering lovely.
She flays him. She flays him, and he like kind of stumbles home to his wife, who kind of seems to be like nonplussed by like what's happened to him. I don't think he explains to her.
He decides that it wouldn't be good for his reputation, so he claims that he was mugged or something.
Mugged, okay, yes.
Some cases he couldn't see.
And then, but it said this is one story where that sense of dread is really effective, because you know that she's not done with him, because the story's only partly done, and you're kind of like, what's the next step of this? And the whole part where they go up.
It's a good sinister character's name as well, actually, the Talamag.
Yes. And then so he gets invited he gets lured to a mansion, right, by some other friends of his.
Which is surrounded by concentric circle walls, it seems. Huge walls, which is not a good sign.
No, and it's all, and when they drive in, it all looks very kind of overgrown, like something's wrong. They can tell right away that this is not how it should be. And they get in there, and it turns out that Talamag has kind of taken over the place with her hench and she has more than one now. She's got four of them. For these monster bodyguards.
And she's
and then the story just descends into absolute madness.
It's great. Every male publisher who turned her down, either sexually or actually one guy did have sex with her, but then didn't give her a book deal. And all these people she's wronged, and their wives. They all have sexy wives with tits as well, and they're all there. And so basically, first one of them, to show she means business. One is branded basically, or even like semi-melt. Like, here we go. After a while, one of her large breasts melted away under the iron as if it had been ice. The thing dangling from the chains was no longer a woman. Its skin had been replaced by a mantle of smouldering scar tissue. The head hung forward with long hair cascading over fattened chest where breasts had been. Nausea churned in all of us.
And the reader, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fucking grim, right? I mean,
it's for the 1930s. It's just insane.
But now, really. But yes,
it's insane now. Yeah, you're right. No, you wouldn't get away with it now. But you'd think that the police would have been at the door with their billy clubs, at Spicy Tales or wherever the hell they printed that thing.
And then she makes all the women strip. And on the other 4 other men feasted their eyes on her loveliness. There's a lot of loveliness. I crushed her loveliness to me, and stuff like that. I thought I've got some more examples coming up, I think. But so then it turns into a weird.
Then we get to the most dangerous game. Part,
really twisted
with paintball, which I did Russell Gray invent paintball? Because this is the first place I've ever seen it in fiction.
Yeah, so basically the women have to run around the grounds naked, while their men are tasked with shooting them with paintballs, and the incentive they have for shooting the other men's wife is that the woman with more paintball shots counted on her body at the end, will
be the next to be tortured. And then there'll be the promise is that then they'll also be released after this second woman is like. I mean, that's what.
Well, the rest of them will be, right? Yeah.
Yes.
She'll be scolded with this. What is the word for that thing full of burning coal, and you take it out and brand people with it? There's a word for that, isn't it? I'm forgetting what it is.
Is it not just a brand?
No, that whole set it's called something. But anyway, if you know, listener, viewer, whatever this turns out to be, let us know. Yeah, so that's horrible enough. I mean, that's like who was that serial killer who lived up somewhere in the wilderness of somewhere or other, who let like naked women run around, and then he just hunted them to death? It's got kind of.
I don't even want to know. I don't think I know that, and I don't.
There's a Nicolas Cage and John Cusack film about called The Frozen Ground. I forget his name, but yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember I remember that movie. Yeah.
So I got those vibes, and of course, Most Dangerous Game vibes as well.
Yes.
And just when you think this isn't heinous stroke totally awesome enough, he goes that extra mile. So they're not just paintball pellets, which would be horrible enough to be shot at, I would imagine, in paintball. They're also acid.
Oh yes, they burn. Yes.
Yeah. So these women are also acid scarred as well.
That Talamag, she's quite a piece of work. That
she's
lady.
Amazing. I'm guessing Angelina Jolie is going to be playing her.
Yes. Yes.
That's who I envision as Talamag. Right. If they ever do the big budget version of this, which of course they never will. But I can dream.
Yes.
Of this just turning up in a multiplex and everyone just going, what the living fuck is this? Yeah. And it's just unremitting. It's unremitting. It's this, and there's whole passages where he's like forced to shoot his own girl with the paintball.
Yeah.
And it's grim, grim, horrible, and then even when they get back to the house, and
I don't know if we need to give away the ending. Maybe we'll just leave the ending open for anyone who wants to read
basically all the
this.
henchmen get in on a bit of a gangbang as well, just to up things.
The gross.
It's the end. Yeah, the ending is, well, it's that kind of straw dogs thing in a way where you're like, you're like, okay, we got away, but like I want to die.
Yep.
Or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre ending, right? The brilliant ending of Texas Chainsaw, when it's just basically someone's just fucking lost their mind.
Their mind's cracked. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wrote down thoughts. Holy living hell, this one's a doozy.
Yeah. Oh no, it's great. This belongs in, and I think it does. I think you do find it in. There are some, some people have put out some collections of like spicy menace or shudder pulp stories. I think Fresh Fiancés from the Devil's Daughter makes it into most of them. I think it's like,
I would think so.
A bit of a go-to text, right? It's even if you put this out now, I think people would say this is horrible. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is just there's no redeeming social value.
No. It reminds me a little bit of, like, again, who's going to direct this? Well, Umberto Lenzi seems an obvious one because it's got the action and the boob trauma, which we know that he can do.
I tell you, who would do a really good version of it, just in terms of unrelentingly grim and horrible and misogynistic, but boring as fuck, would be relocated to Staten Island. Have Andy Milligan have had the shot to do.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But without any effects or anything, just people spewing hateful dialogue.
Yeah, that would work.
I'd watch.
And then, I mean, but then, and who else? I was thinking that. Well, that's now that you mentioned it, that feeling of like where the end is just like, oh, the last house. Oh no, not Last House on the Left.
Last House
House by the Edge of the Park.
Oh, House on the Edge of the Park, right?
Yeah, which is Deodato. He might have done all right with this as well, because he had the action chops as well as the horror chops. But you need for this a director who had both.
Yeah,
quite a lot of this is action.
Yeah, for the breast bouncing, running around in the wilderness scenes, right?
And the hunt. Yeah. You need a proper action director.
I can see that. I can see as well. I can see, like, I don't know, someone really stacked. Like, who's that blonde chick from Jess Franco's Devil Hunter? Like, I can see her like running naked in slow-mo while we hear the
right
Cannibal Holocaust theme.
Right.
Before she's blasted.
And in the background, the occasional crack and scream of the other people being shot by the paintball. Anyway,
for the film version, not blue pellets, they've got to be red.
Okay, all right, sure thing.
For the whole blood on breasts, rape trigger, BBFC, to guarantee that it doesn't get a release on VHS. Right.
Absolutely.
Going off on a tangent. Yeah. Gargoyles of Madness.
Yes. This one's weird too.
Yeah, very much in common with the mannequins one.
Yes, it's another police reporter, and it's kind of the same, and this is the one where, yes, like these kind of local pillars of the community are committing these crimes and seem to be kind of possessed by some sort of gargoyle. And there's also little figures, again, like in the mannequins one, right? It's almost a redone version of the same story.
Yeah, and a very kind of again, surprising, maybe coming from who it comes from, but this kind of cartoonish, the very American, stand your ground take on law enforcement as well. There's a policeman talking about this mugging that happens at the beginning of this, where he goes, I see this guy standing in the shadow of the building with this lady. They look like they're talking, so I don't think nothing of it. Then I see him snatch a bag out of her hand, and as he half turns, I see he's holding a gun. When he hears me running over, he turns and takes a shot at me. The shot don't come within a mile of me. Fair enough. Then I let him have it with my own gun and drill him clean through the heart. It's very much that, you don't let them get away kind of.
Two-fisted, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's that much to say, but I actually, as I said, it's not the most gory or believable. I do remember there's a part where the villain of this piece literally does come in a proper Scooby-Doo costume. He comes in a full gargoyle costume with a whip.
Yeah. Just so we have an idea what the Gargoyles of Madness look like. Sergeant Fitzpatrick took from her hand the tiny figure of a repulsive naked female squatting on her heels. Flabby breasts, not lovelies. Flabby breasts dangling, hands clasped over an obscenely swelling belly. The hideous face was contorted into an idiot smirk of slobbering lust and sheer bestiality. The figure was about 2 or 3 inches high, carved out of soapstone.
Right, I'm trying to remember what the point was. This just, it was an extortion scheme, my bad. That's what was going on, and basically he'd been drugging these people and kind of conditioning them into almost like a Manchurian candidate. Once they saw the little gargoyle, they would kind of go into the the mode of committing crimes, whether they be thieving or sex crimes, and then he could blackmail them. Basically,
there's a few of these which were, it was someone who wanted they were left out of the family business or something.
That might be that one, yes.
Right. Yeah. To be honest, by the time I got to that last
the motivation, yes.
The last page was just in my brain. I read the words, but I was just okay. Next one.
So the one after that, however, is another one of the, to my mind, holy living shit. Girls for the Pain Dance.
Sorry. I just more examples of adorable bodies being crushed against. Here we go. No, I remember the ending of this one. Actually, the ending of this one was the main character. Yes, it was. He was cut out of the family business, and then added to that. Not many years ago, I was sent to South America to do a series of articles, and he met an old Indian witch doctor, and that's where he learned the secret of the Gargoyles of Madness. And also, this one ends with, again, the district attorney of a friend is a friend of mine. And it's all swept under the carpet as well.
It's all good.
Very much abuse of power going on with these reported stories.
That's the one too where they wake up and there's like hands cut off in their beds, right? Yes.
But yes, okay. You're quite right, Nick. The only one to come close, I think, to Fresh Fiancés, and in some ways is even more horrible. Because it's so abstractly horrible.
This one actually got under my skin.
Girls
no
for the
pun
Pain
intended.
Dance.
More than any of the other ones, I think, because, and again, it's a bit more like, well, not quite. It's not quite like I think the Hostesses in Hell one is the most like, here's 20 ladies and we're going to torture all of them. Right. But this one does introduce right away. It's kind of, we got a young protagonist in love with the usual, young cute girl. They're out at the lake for the summer, and then things go sideways fast.
Yeah. Well, this one as well, I think what I liked about this one is, I suppose they're all kind of surreal to a certain extent, but this one is so fucking just, as well as being sadistic and nasty, and this one's just so weird. Like
the very first image, or the very first kind of shocking image of the story is when they're kind of looking across the lake and there's a kind of parting in the trees, and there's this girl suddenly appears, nude and broiled red, doing this crazy dance.
I said that she danced. If you can imagine a kangaroo dancing, then the fantastic gyrations through which she went could be called that.
There we go.
Yeah. So there's a naked chick kind of like, just like
freaking out.
Being like she's got in a weird kind of, and it's immediately like you said, it does get under your skin because it's
arresting.
It's like, what the fuck now is like.
And I almost imagine it too, like if you ever seen that footage of like the crazy hippie lady dancing from like from Woodstock, kind of like this kind of like arms flailing kind of like,
right.
Everything about it's just weird. And then it turns out the whole story is a really really brutal kidnapping, extortion ring, who have the weirdest MO of any group you've ever heard.
Like, so they basically snatch girls off the street, and where it turns out towards the end of the story a bit more about how they train them. So it goes like, if you didn't think it was already nasty enough, it kind of goes even further.
Yeah.
For the time being, they have bits of, so that, they kidnap these girls and they do something to them, and they end up doing this retarded kangaroo dance thing, and then they turn up usually in like the gardens of their family or something, on fire, like
human around,
and get charred to death, or even worse, almost dead. And because they've had bits of kindling shoved into the
soaked in oil.
Softest parts of their body. He just leaves it at that. And so young women are immolated
in front of their families at garden parties
for being hot. Is their crime.
Well, it seems at the beginning, but then it turns out there is actually a method to the evil, I guess, or reason.
What was left of Hilda Derrick was a gruesome sight. Every inch of her body, which had been so sweet and fresh with youth only a short time ago, was horribly charred. Scores of wooden slivers dipped in pitch had been inserted in her body, and then ignited. She must have suffered frightfully.
Yes, I think I have my final notes. I said the violence and torture in this one is extremely nasty. The splinter fireball tortures are beyond Fulcian levels of horrific. So I should explain maybe to people who don't know who Lucio Fulci was. Lucio Fulci was an Italian film director of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, who in the 80s started to specialize in an extremely kind of gory scenes, right? He became kind of famous for going beyond what you would expect to see. And so, but I feel like this goes, I don't think Fulci would have touched this even in the Nightmare and the Damaged Brain kind of Fulci era, kind of his failing powers when he's...
The only thing I thought was comparable is not all the way through, but that very first murder scene in the uncut version of Don't Go in the House.
Okay.
Where the woman is chained up and attacked with a flamethrower. And it's very long and graphic and incredibly intense. And also, of course, has that added, she's naked and good-looking thing thrown in as well. Like, which is what makes all these things problematic to a certain degree. Is it's not just the fact that
it's not just violence.
It's always good-looking naked
violence.
So once again, the blackened mass of human flesh still breathed. The two charred mounds, which had once been luscious breasts, agonizingly rose and fell.
The boob trauma is just unrelenting. And it's funny, actually, I just remember there was something I meant to mention earlier. In fact, the most disturbing image to me from the whole book comes in, I think it's in not the Gargoyles one, it's the Mannequins one. And it's because, of course, it's the eyes, ears, and mouth, like that, there's a part where he describes that this woman's had her tongue that pulled out of her face. And there's a very grisly description of what it looks like. And it was just, it was really just gross.
The other thing I liked about this one as well is, again, similar to Fresh Fiancés, is that kind of unrelenting, like, no good deed, no good characters. So there's one character whose daughter has been snatched, and he went to the police chief or something, and he refused to, like, pander to this group. The Devil's Disciples or whatever. And then his own daughters end up, but rather than kind of be sympathetic, the other guy is just full of resentment and bile, and he goes, "Now you see your own daughter in hell. You will watch the devil have his way with her, and later you will see her burnt into a hideous blackened stump before your eyes." And so much relish, like, it'll happen to you.
It does make sense, because he wouldn't, because that dad wouldn't lend him the money to bail his daughter out, and now his daughter's getting the same treatment. So yeah, I mean, from a human nature perspective, it does make sense. And then of course it turns out that the very first dad or a guardian is in fact the villain of the whole piece.
Yes, the leader of the devil's disciples, who hangs out in a old coal mine,
abandoned mine. Yes, and that's where the dance piece comes in. Or they have a gigantic frying pan kind of thing in there, which they superheat and make the girl stand.
They literally put in a giant frying pan, and made to dance on until they lose their minds, and then the sores, their feet are so fucked up that even when they're not on the frying pan, out in the woods, they get like splinters and shit in there.
Here's a point that actually jumped out at me in terms of that like unbelievable writing, or when like I was like, oh, that's meant for the sleazy reader. That doesn't make sense for the protagonist, because this is a first-person story, right?
Yeah.
And he shows up and he's found his girlfriend, and she's in the frying pan being tortured, and he refers to her not by her name but as the nude girl. Right. Yeah. The nude girl was dancing. You don't want to
let that.
She's your girlfriend.
You don't want to let that opportunity to slide past to remind the reader.
Right, but it's his girlfriend, and she's being tortured. Does he need? It really jumped out at me. It was like, oh yeah, that's an odd choice on behalf of our narrator to remind us of the sleazy element.
And yes, once again, this turns out to be someone left out of a will or something.
Yes,
the reveals are so ridiculous, because what he's done is he's created these stories that are unlike anything else. But then the Scooby-Doo endings are from normal stories, aren't they?
Yeah,
they both match. So they're like, yes, I flayed the skin of all these young girls because I remember that time I lent you $5 and you didn't give it back. Like, it's always massively out of proportion.
Yes, there's like a screeching of the gears as they change. Which,
to be honest, is what kind of makes them interesting now.
That's part of the charm of their utter bizarreness. And then I did quite like actually School Mistress of the Mad, or whatever it was.
It's a bit different, isn't it? It's a bit different.
It's the most, although it comes up in a few of them, but that's the most obviously kind of rural horror.
Yes.
It has two things going on. It has that kind of Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like the city people make a mistake and turn left in the countryside when they should have turned right, and end up. And then the other thing that it reminded me of is actually there's a couple of Lovecraft stories about these degenerative, like there's the one where they all live in a big hill together in like a warren kind of.
Right. Well, even Dagon, to an extent, right? Is
well, the Innsmouth, for sure.
Yeah.
The inbred yokels who have kind of gone mad.
But this is like, it's kind. They make the locals kind of make like the hillbillies from like Wrong Turn or something look really sophisticated.
Yes,
that kind of.
Although this is the one story that has a supernatural element that's not fully explained, which is weird. Because at one point I thought like, oh, they've explained these weird, mysterious gray ghost figures as being just. Yes,
they're called the Grings. And to be honest, I was slightly confused as well, because I wasn't quite sure. Had they given their souls away, or were the Grings the souls? And it was kind of it was very. I mean, I didn't really need it to be explained to me, because I was just kind of okay, whatever. It's Russell Gray, but it was a like if you were going to turn this into a film, for example, you'd kind of have to find the internal logic to it. Yeah, which
the story doesn't seem to.
Yeah.
The other thing about this story, more than any of them, is it's got the most S&M-y. I mean, the other stories, there's seldom a feeling that the women are kind of like, yes, I'm down with this. Right. What's going on? Like it's just straight up sadism. It's torture, right? But this is the first story that introduces this other thing of this masochistic, which it takes it in a whole other direction.
Run away, she echoed in a puzzled tone. They were nice to me. Dorcas whipped me. Ah, it was so lovely. The exquisite pain.
Yeah, there you go. So this is, I wonder if that was as a feature of his other stories, or if this is an outlier in kind of.
Well, I was curious as well if there was a development in Russell Gray, like he got more and more jaded and like started to discover his inner kind of sadist more and more. I don't know, because I
love the idea that he's also simultaneously running for socialist mayor of like New Jersey or something like that.
Because there's so Catwoman is the earlier story here, which kind of makes sense actually.
Yes,
he hasn't quite found his voice yet, right? And then Death Sends His Mannequins, Girls for the Paint Dancer 37. Where does School Mistress of the Mad? Yeah, it's later, 1939.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Song of Evil Love and We Who Are Lost are later on again. And that's interesting because he seems to be slightly, in a way, even though I prefer the other stories because of their more kind of almost abstract kind of crayon-like simplicity. Mm-hmm. The later stories are clearly him getting a slightly bit more of a sophisticated writer, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
So again, this one, actually, it's not entirely. It is something to do with silver from the mines and some.
Yes, yeah, there is again an avarice kind of which again gets back to that socialist kind of thing that's going on.
But I know what you mean. There's a thing at the end. It's weird. I don't know if it's a mea culpa. I don't know if it's like him admitting, oh yeah, I know some bits of this story don't make sense, but don't worry about it. Or like you said, if it's a pointed kind of how much of this were they willing victims, right? So he actually lists things at the end, which is quite romantic. He's like, perhaps they hadn't eaten that particular food, but how could Linda have been drugged, and why had the spell over her? Right. He points out the flaws in his own story. Yes. But then he says, yet later when Chet and Linda were married, they would sometimes clutch each other in panic or fear, wondering if her love for him might turn her back into the she-demon who had striven to drink his blood. So there's very much this,
yes,
you can't trust these women, see, because you'll turn your back. And, so better to mutilate their breasts now before they turn on you. Who knows?
This one, it's funny because in this story and actually the two that follow are all sort of vampire stories or have vampiristic elements, right? And so this is the first one that opens up a little space for maybe an actual supernatural element, and the next two I think also open up that space. Like it was like he was segueing into doing from the Scooby-Doo, it's all it's all a plot, into this more maybe there's something.
This one, Song of Evil Love, is a bit of a rewrite of the beginning of Fresh Fiancés, right? There's like this character, Bronca. He's good with names. He's got some quite cool names in here. And this is about a pianist who's again basically seduced against his will
by a vampiristic
super hot pianist who again plays unutterable music.
Very Lovecraftian.
I thought this was great. He gives a concert to some people.
That's brilliant.
And it turns into a riot.
Yes, right? That's a great idea.
It also reminded me a little bit how it's kind of a progenitor of that kind of. Did you ever read that book? Is it called Flicker? Which is I can't remember his name, Theodore Rosash or something. It was like about a film geek who discovers like this old film from the 50s that it basically has evil in it.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
One of John Carpenter's Masters of Horror, Cigarette Burns, I think it was called. It was kind of a bit of a rip-off of that idea.
Okay.
It's quite a fun novel, quite a fun read. But I like that idea of, I suppose it's the urban myth as well about like how The Exorcist, was actually evil. The film itself was actually evil.
Yeah.
Printed on Satan's celluloid, that kind of
right,
or I guess even the stone tape idea that the Nigel Neal that if something's traumatic enough, it imprints on the media, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking this as well. The whole idea of music that drives someone totally nuts. There's something, isn't it? There's like a really famous example of that.
And I feel
it's
like
not coming to me.
No, but I feel like in other stories, well, there is. I mean, again, going back to Lovecraft, there's something of Eric Dan. Or there is a story about a guy who plays the viola, and it drives him mad, and anyone else who hears it mad.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Maybe.
But then there's also, I mean, there's an element as well in some of these stories about the kind of whole like music. I'm sure shows that. I'm sure there's kind of tribal drumming in at least one or two of the other stories as well.
Right.
That kind of brings out this.
Song of the Mermaid thing as well is part of that as well, and very much ties into the you can't trust women.
Yeah. I think
kind of.
I think there was a really pronounced fear in America of Black music, and this idea that it somehow had this direct link to sexuality, and that it was it was a way to lure white women.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Elvis himself being a kind of a only filmed from the waist up, like this music is sexually dangerous, it's threatening.
Right. But again, 20 years before all that, right? I just realized that was a weird oxymoron. We just said, yes, this writing is very progressive in being massively regressive. So yeah, again, they try and tidy this up again, like you said. So at the end, there's like the psychologist coming in, and he's like, "Oh no, your music didn't. It's and he just basically goes blah 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 blah."
Kind of hand waves. Well, it's just work-related exhaustion. You're not really a vampire. Although they do hand wave away the fact he clearly murdered that woman.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Him and his agent.
Which is a bit. Hang on, I did make note of this. Is going back to the kind of what they do as well after he's murdered the woman is we dressed her and placing a dead arm about each of her necks. We half carried, half dragged her out through a back exit. If anyone saw us, we could explain that she was drunk. We dumped her body in a doorway several blocks away.
Yeah,
and that's it. It's
really quite grim.
Cold. Yeah.
He's a famous concert pianist. He can't be getting involved with.
Yeah. Exactly.
Scandal.
But once again, you can never rest easy, Nick. You can never rest around women, because even though it's explained away by the psychologist, and so I live in constant fear that one evening during a recital, my fingers of their own accord will start to play that music of the damned, or that one night when I hold Aline's yielding body in my arms, that melody will suddenly be in my brain, and then it hasn't happened yet. Not yet.
Yes.
Which I suppose slightly more there's the evil in him rather than in women with big tits for a change.
Yes.
I suppose he was trying different things out,
Yes, for sure. And then the very last story as well, which is also feels like it's further moving into this idea of actual supernatural horror, because it's a straight up vampire story, really. But it's a rural, like near dark kind of like US rural vampire story, right?
Yeah, a bit of Salem's Lot as well.
Yeah.
But what impressed me most about this one was, in a way, again, like I said, I had, it's not as if Russell Gray's is a wholehearted recommendation, but there's always something, like in almost every story, there's something. So this one was one of the least interesting for me in a way, because in a way he's becoming a better writer in a way which in some ways is less interesting.
Yes.
And the story is of amateur. But then again, I can't think of any other. I mean, it's the whole, following the vampires back to their lair and staking their hearts trope, right? But I've never seen it done like this before, where he dynamites the coffins. So their bodies are
spread all over the basement. And he finds their hearts.
Yeah, then fucks off and then comes back. And then there's this whole bit where he's at the top of the stairs going down to the basement, and he's just like, I don't know why, but my mind just cracked. I went down the basement step by step. I got more and more loony because I was going into the depths of hell, and I scrabbled among the bits of bodies and found the heart and then staked it.
Yes.
And I thought, holy fuck, this is
yes.
this is pretty
Exactly.
fun, right? And again, something I would love to see someone try and
do in a movie,
bring to the screen. Yeah.
That's getting almost into like Dead Alive territory.
Right, but without any comedy. Without any comedy, right? Like dead serious.
The other thing that I actually thought was quite smart about that story was the whole photography angle, where basically he's been taking these pictures and these vampires are showing up on the film, but they're not apparently there. But it's all because back then the cameras had these mirrors, and so you're not actually looking at the scene, you're looking at a mirror image of the scene where the vampires aren't showing up.
Right.
They are being exposed to the film, and then they show up on the, and I thought it was a pretty nice conceit.
It's slightly more like he runs ahead in some ways, right? Like you're like, oh wow, he's gone a bit forward into some like very proto kind of into the interview with the vampire stuff as well, like the whole stuff at the very end where they kind of resign themselves to, oh fuck, we're vampires now. Like it's nicely done in a way. It's like the way he's like, and then I found myself slipping out the door to follow the man's daughter, whose neck seemed to have hypnotized me. But it was much better than oddly enough, much better than I've made it sound. Considering how clunky some of the earlier stuff was, his nose started to get a little bit better as well, didn't it?
Yes.
So I would be interested. Please fill me in on volume 2, because I want to know if they go back and it's in the same time period, or if it's later stuff he wrote, or because he wrote novels in the 50s as well, right?
Yes, that's right. I'd be interested to read those two that we mentioned at the top of the show.
House of Flesh and The Lustful Ape. I mean,
great titles.
Yeah, if I was in a secondhand bookstore and I came across a book called The Lustful Ape, I mean, there's no chance I'm not buying that. Right?
Yes, and they were gold medal books as well, which they published Jim Thompson and Charles Williams and a bunch of other great kind of 50s noir writers who were equally not maybe equally violent, but almost equally violent in another way. Like when you go back and read like the Killer Inside Me, it is shocking.
Yes, I suppose
how tough it is, how mean it is, how ugly it is. Yeah. Maybe not so gory.
No, but with an unremittingly grim view of human
hard edge. Yeah. Maybe I'd be interested to see. I mean, it'd be great if somebody would just republish everything that Gold Medal ever did, just like the Gold Medal line, and you just have access to it.
I think it's rights issue because they do come out in dribs and drabs. There's like some doing it over here, some people doing it over there, and some people are like sticking to public domain stuff, and some people are doing stuff that isn't officially in the public domain, but they're like chancing it that no one will come after them.
Right.
And then I suppose the main
Vintage Black Lizard did a good job of doing a lot of it, but they didn't certainly do Russell Gray's that I'm aware of. Or Bruno Fisher.
I think that brings us to another thing. The one thing that's missing from this collection, because you reminded me that a lot of the Kindle reprints and stuff now, which are great because you can read some really interesting books for like couple of dollars rather than have to pay big money for really old paperbacks. It's the one thing they don't do, because the art rights resided with the artists, and they give them these generic crappy new covers, which is fine. You can find reprints of the original beautiful covers online. But the one thing missing from this, and well done Dancing Flatara Press for putting this out at all, so I'm not, it would be churlish of me to complain. But the one thing missing is the illustrations.
If there were any.
Check back. Oh, there were.
Wow.
Take a look.
Okay.
Take a look.
I shall.
There's some pretty interesting borderline illustrations for some of these stories.
Wow. Okay.
From the spicy pulps or the shudder pulps or the weird menace pulps or whatever you want to call them. So I think that's Russell Gray pretty much done, right? I mean,
in a box.
I'm glad we.
A man loved boobies or hated boobies. I'm still not quite sure.
No. I'm glad we took a chance on this one.
Me too.
However, one thing I just wanted to mention briefly now that we've more or less put this episode to bed. So I'd heard of Ramble House. This Dancing Trotara Press seems to be part of Ramble House. I'd heard of Ramble House. I knew Ramble House was around. They've been doing stuff for a while. But at the back of this book, they actually have, you know, like the also
the
available.
catalog.
Yeah. And I don't think I'd ever like really paid attention specifically. And this is terrifying. Like all this stuff sounds fascinating.
Interesting, yeah.
I'm sure it's not all. I'm sure a lot of it is a bit of, you know, just kind of crap and people digging up stuff that doesn't need to be dug up. And there were a few things I have actually read and weren't that taken by. However, some of this stuff has just got to be gold.
Yeah.
Right. For instance, there's a whole page devoted to Harry Stephen Keeler mysteries. Used to be an incredibly prolific writer of, I guess, differently abled mystery fiction.
Right. Yeah.
Following. I've never read any of his stuff, but I'm thinking maybe we should take a punt on some Harry Stephen Keeler on literary effects sometime. Other things, I mean, there's just so many things here listed that just sounds like, oh, I need that. Like Murder
It's
Among
a dangerous feeling.
Newsists is one of my favorite ones here. It sounds like it might be rubbish. Murder Among the Newsists, a mystery from 1934 by Peter Hunt, featuring a naked detective inspector going undercover in a nudist colony.
In the 30s, yeah. That sounds awesome.
How are you not going to want to read that? Yeah, just loads of fascinating sounding things. Just some of the titles alone are great. The Tongueless Horror and Other Stories, volume 1 of the series of short stories from the Weird Pulps again by
there we go.
Blassingame.
Okay.
It was one of the names they mentioned in the intro as being like a contemporary of Russell Gray. So I'm thinking we might want to tackle Wyatt Blassingame as well.
Yep.
So
okay.
Of course we don't want this to turn into the Shudder podcast.
No.
Maybe we'll start another podcast. Because, you know, we don't already do too many.
No, not at all. We are not spreading ourselves too thin by any stretch of imagination. So I guess, you know, we recommend this cautiously to people who are maybe already fans of ultra gore, to people who are interested in the history of violence in literature, to people who love boobs, and to people who hate boobs. Yep. Yeah. I mean, as I said, I enjoyed them, but I am clearly mental. So
yes, but
so I don't know.
Gradations of mental. So yeah, if you've successfully knocked one out to Russell Gray, don't contact us.
Yes, please.
Stay away.
Please.
We don't want to meet you.
No.
But
no,
if you've written any fiction, send it our way. We might be interested to read that. So, you know, I think you can tell from this chat. I think if anyone listens anyway, or watches, or whatever the fuck this happens to this, you'll know if this is for you or not, really.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that wraps it up for this time. As Feck.
Yep.
Next time it'll be my choice, and I think I'll be choosing something slightly classier.
Oh, a little more highbrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that, but we'll get to the mutilated tits in no time at all, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, I'm sure there's several other writers who delved deeply into that subgenre of literature.
So until then,
Oscar Wilde has a couple of stories. I'm pretty sure.
Until then, stay safe. Keep your arms clasped tightly around your chest, just in case, because you never know who's around. And
if a beautiful lady invites you to her apartment to look at her books, just say no.
Yeah.
Just say no.
Well, I'm of the different opinion. Go.
Okay.
But, you know,
you're going to roll those dice.
I have been Clive Davis, and he has been
Nicholas O'Sheacon.
And this has been Literary as Feck. Until next time, bye.